Hello and welcome. Today we will talk about socialization and stereotypes. As you know, socialization is the process of growing up as a young child in a specific environment, in a specific city, in a specific culture, informing our beliefs and eventually becoming the type of person or character that perhaps we were destined to be. And you can look at it basically, I am who I am because of what I lived in the values and beliefs that I was accustomed to, in the norms that I was expected to abide by. So that is socialization, referring to the childhood years, the early years when we were growing up. And as you know, those early years are very strong in terms of its influence for the rest of our lives regarding our beliefs and behaviors and values. So change becomes much more difficult if we were only growing up with a very, very strong set of values that were coming from one perspective with no variation whatsoever. However, before we can change some of the values that we don't necessarily agree with as adults, we need to find out the root of it in terms of where do they come from and why do I behave the way I do. Chances are that the root of it is part of our socialization. So once we discover the root cause of why we behave the way we behave, then if relevant and needed, we can obviously change it by doing things based on facts at the time. So socialization is about how we learn to fit in and get along with others in society or in the local community. When we're thinking about the origins of our personal beliefs and values, keep in mind it's not always easy for everybody to recall those younger years, because there may have been a variety of different influences that have shaped our beliefs and values as a result of our socialization in a specific school, in a specific city, in a specific culture. Some of these influences are more impactful than others and may have been culturally based. And these influences do take place in the socialization process of young children at a younger age, especially those first few years of life all the way to teenage years. We could be influenced on a regular basis through various sources. So that's what we refer to as socialization. As children learn about the world around them, they receive a lot of good information from many sources, and perhaps some misinformation as they grow and mature and socialize with those around them. This misinformation is usually conveyed in an overt fashion or sometimes through more subtle ways, if not directly stated. So this distortion is delivered without malicious intent, but often children receive this misrepresentation about people who are perhaps a little bit different than themselves. So misinformation as well as good information can be delivered to younger children during their socialization years, directly or indirectly, from messages that are stated verbally and things that are perhaps left out about people who are a little bit or a lot different than us in terms of language, in terms of skin color, in terms of body size, in terms of cultural differences, in terms of abilities and disabilities, and perhaps ways of doing things in various environments. So what are the various sources of information that has an influence on our socialization? Actually, there are many sources of information. However, the most influential tend to be family, education, our peers and teammates, as well as media, which happens to be very influential in today's environment, as we see the examples of YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, for example, where people pass on information. And some information seems to go viral almost within minutes, if not longer. So think about sources of information related to family. What did we learn from our family members? If you look at back in the late 80s or mid 80s, for example, family members used to eat dinner together, and we used to socialize with mom and dad, and grandparents and uncles around the dinner table, talk and chat a little bit about what happened every single day or every single hour in school or in activities during the day. However, in today's environment, for example, in 2024, we see that social media has taken over. So the influence of family around dinner table is not likely to be similar as it was 3, 4 decades ago when we did not have the cell phones and smartphones and computers and social media to the extent that we have nowadays. So from these various sources of information, we learn that we tend to become like our caretakers and those we hang around because they have a huge influence on us. Our education system, for example, may have had a built-in, somewhat subtle slant toward whatever the prevailing culture was at a given time in our city, our culture, our country. Also learned that when we belong to one group, perhaps then we don't belong in certain other groups. And we may have received some stereotypical messages about other people through television, through movies, through social media, and through what we read on the newspaper, what we hear on the radio in today's environment, obviously, what we see on YouTube, what we see on Snapchat, what we see on TikTok. All of these could be influential sources of information in what we believe as young children and how we behave eventually as adults in the workplace. So these various sources of information do have a huge amount of influence on us. And that's what we call cultural conditioning, which can be very strong and long lasting. We all have some stereotypes or what is referred to as mental tapes because they stay here. They get recorded in our brain, and we tend to repeat them over and over and reinforce the same concepts oftentimes in our circle of friends, teammates, and family members. So we all have these stereotypes or mental tapes which were developed as a result of cultural conditioning, which tend to impact our thinking, our feelings, and our behaviors in the workplace, especially toward those who are different from us, be they our colleagues, our employees, our bosses, our superiors, or our vendors, or in general, any customer that comes into your workplace. So cultural conditioning over time can be very strong and very influential in terms of what is in our head, in terms of what is in our heart, and basically how we form our habits with regards to people who are different from us. So this is where stereotypes actually come in. Let us see what stereotypes are and how they're defined. The word stereotype comes from two Greek words, stereo meaning solid and typos meaning a model. So initially the word stereotype used to refer to metal plates that were used for printing pages of the same writing or diagrams. However, when the word stereotype is applied to people, it symbolizes rigidity, repetitiveness, and formalization of certain behaviors that can be very, very negative toward individuals who don't necessarily exhibit the same characteristics that are associated with these stereotypes. Cultures often provide both accurate and faulty generalizations about people. Stereotypes become very hurtful and ineffective when people use them to discriminate against a person or groups of individuals without considering the current facts or evidence. So this leads to discrimination toward individuals who might be very different from the majority. The word discrimination takes its root from the Latin word discrimino, which means to divide or separate into a division or category. So discrimino, Latin word, tends to refer to dividing or separating into division or category. As a result of these repetition of stereotypes and discriminatory behaviors, we often go on what is referred to as automatic pilot or autopilot for short. So when we're going on automatic pilot or autopilot, That means we're not thinking consciously. So autopilot means responding without consciously thinking. And as human beings, we do have a tendency to respond without thinking or knowing why we do what we do or why we behave the way we behave toward people who are different from us. So we make assumptions and decisions based on our previously learned stereotypes and conditioning through various sources like family, like school, education, and even media in general. So the lesson is, do not make assumptions about individuals based on their abilities, disabilities, height, body size, gender, skin color, hair color, culture, ethnicity, and so on. Each person is an individual. He or she should be assessed according to his or her credentials and qualification, as opposed to stereotypes or prejudgments. Need to get off of autopilot. You can get off of autopilot by becoming aware of the facts, choosing our responses, and thinking consciously based on current evidence, not stereotypes. So while we cannot always erase mental tapes in the years of experience that we went through as young children, we can certainly record over them by having new experiences, by providing evidence and having evidence and becoming conscious of the reality as opposed to operating based on those biases or stereotypes. So become aware and choose your responses consciously based on current facts to get off of autopilot. This means we need to think before we respond, and we need to respond then based on facts. So in order to get off of being on autopilot, we need to become educated and think for ourselves. And then obviously it's easy to be you. And the key is to be the best you can be. And hopefully, if you're making decisions based on facts, then you're not biased, you're not on autopilot. And if facts change, your judgment, your decisions change with those facts as you become aware of them. Ralph Waldo Trine said that there are many who are living far below their possibilities because they are continually handing over their individualities to others. Do you want to be a power in the world? If so, then be yourself. Make decisions based on current facts and your own thinking, as opposed to being driven by autopilot and stereotypes that we receive during our socialization years as young children. For example, sometimes ageism, the stereotypes associated with it comes from society, from media, and from peers, and sometimes from family members, perhaps. As someone said, we do not talk about trees getting older. We say they are growing. Let us use the same language for ourselves. We're not getting older, we are growing. And keep in mind, as we're growing, that means we have more knowledge. So a person who is an older worker, she or he can contribute immensely to the workplace because he or she has more years of experience compared to those who are younger in society. So we can avoid discriminatory practices toward older workers, toward women, toward minorities, toward those with disabilities, by focusing on their abilities and how they can contribute effectively, productively in the workplace to our team projects, to our organizational projects, and to their own individual tasks and duties. I like Nelson Mandela's statement when he said that no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or her skin, or his or her background, or his or her religion. People learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, then they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So we do not have to keep operating on autopilot. Whatever we learn, whatever mental tapes we have acquired, we can certainly undo some of it or record over them and change our behaviors to make sure all of our decisions are based on facts in today's environment. So remember that through equity and inclusionary practices, you can make diversity an advantage for you, for your team and your organization by making decisions based on today's facts.